My daughter-in-law told the whole world I was at death's door just so she could sneak out and spend my pension money on another man. Hearing my youngest son's voice on that line from Italy was the moment the fog finally cleared, making me realize that the woman I welcomed into my home had turned my own sanctuary into a place where I was being erased. You know, there are moments in this life when the very house you built with your own two hands starts to feel like a place you do not recognize anymore. My name is Raylee, and I want to tell you about a night that changed everything for me. It was the night a simple phone call from my youngest son woke up the woman I used to be, the one who had been lost in silence for far too long. If you have ever felt your heart tighten because of a lie told by someone you trusted, please hit that like button or just say hello in the comments. It really means a lot to have you here with me right now. I look out at my backyard garden, the soil dry and waiting for someone to care for it again. It used to be the pride of my life, a piece of land my late husband and I fought so hard to keep during that terrible economic crash back in 2008. I still catch myself twisting my wedding ring when I think about how we survived those years together. I looked over at Karen, sitting there on the sofa, and tried to bridge the gap. I suggested we all get out there this weekend to plant some new roses, since the weather was going to be so nice. But she didn't even look up from that expensive new phone of hers, the one I know she bought using the money I had set aside for my grandbabies. She just shrugged her shoulders, her voice as cold as a drafty window in mid-January, telling me that nobody does that kind of work anymore because it is just dirty and exhausting. Then she turned the TV volume up so high that the noise from those loud game shows seemed to just swallow me whole right there in my own living room. Late that night, the silence of my cold bedroom was shattered by the sharp ring of my phone. It was Michael, my youngest, calling all the way from his naval base in Italy. When his face popped up on the screen, I could see the beautiful night sky over the water behind his ship. But he did not look happy to see me. He looked confused, his voice trembling with worry. He told me he had just seen Karen at a high-end jewelry shop in the middle of Naples, and she was not alone. He saw an older man putting a diamond bracelet on her wrist. My heart just stopped. Naples. Karen had told my other son, Colin, that she was just going to visit an old friend in the next town over for the night. Right then, I heard Colin's voice drifting in from the other room, sounding exhausted from another long shift at work. He told Michael to lower his voice and stop bothering me because Karen was supposedly working herself to the bone taking care of me while I was deathly ill. A terrifying silence washed over me as that lie settled into the room like a heavy stone. I felt a physical ache, a sharp pang in my chest that spread all the way down to my old, tired joints. Karen stepped into the doorway then, looking at me with those indifferent eyes and a thin, hollow smile that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. I felt like a prisoner in a cage made of her lies, a complete numbness taking over my mind. I sank into my old armchair, my fingers trembling as I gripped the hem of my sweater. This betrayal from someone I called family tasted as bitter as a cup of coffee with no sugar. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. As I looked around the shadows of the room, I realized I could not find my wooden walking stick where I always keep it. Karen had started taking more than just my dignity with her lies. I found myself wondering if I would keep fading away into the background, or if I would find the strength to stand up for myself. The answer was buried in everything I had sacrificed over the years, and I am going to tell you all about that next. I sat there in the dark, letting my mind wander back to those years I spent working night shifts at the city's public hospital. I can still feel the way my hands would shake from pure exhaustion after 12 hours on my feet, all just to save every penny from my pension and insurance. I did not think twice about pulling $50,000 from that retirement fund I had built up since the post-war boom years, just to help Colin with the down payment on this house. Back then, I truly believed I was building a soft place for myself to land in my old age. I gave up my time, my health, and those travel dreams I used to have, thinking a mother's sacrifice would be rewarded with a seat at the family table. But looking back now, I see that those sacrifices were just the bricks Karen used to build the walls of my own prison. A cruel pattern started to clear up in my head, one I should have seen a long time ago. Karen was only ever sweet to me when a new check was needed or when the grandkids' tuition was due. I remember how she would lean in and tell me I was the pillar of this family, but the minute that money hit her pocket, she would treat me like a ghost haunting the hallway. She was so slick about it, using that power of attorney I signed over when I was grieving and weak after my husband passed away. The numbers started adding up in my mind, plain as day. $1,200 meant for my blood pressure and arthritis medicine just vanished every month. There were cash withdrawals at high-end shopping malls where I have never even set foot. This bitter truth hit me like a bucket of ice water, soaking through the naive faith I had as a mother. That low, aching sadness I had been carrying finally turned into something else. A quiet kind of strength that felt like a cold fire. I looked down at the dark bruise on my arm where Karen had shoved me against the wall last week, and I felt something inside me just snap. I am not that woman anymore. The one who stays quiet and takes the insults just to have a seat at dinner. Enough! I whispered those words to myself in the middle of the night, and they felt like a holy vow. I will not let a lifetime of hard work be chewed up by greed and lies for one more day. That decision was made right then, as cold and certain as any hard choice I have ever had to make. When the first bit of morning light started peeking through the curtains the next day, my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I stopped waiting for her permission or a fake inquiry about my health. I went to my closet, pulled out my most comfortable clothes, and slipped on my Skechers that had been sitting in the back for way too long. A new chapter was starting right then, one where I was not the victim anymore, but the one finally taking the wheel of my own life. I woke up this morning without that heavy weight pressing down on my chest for the first time in ages. Instead of rushing to the kitchen to fix breakfast for everyone like I usually do, I just stayed in bed, listening to the birds chirping outside my window. I made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea and let that strong scent fill the air, even though Karen always complains it is too much for her. I sat out on the porch and let the early morning sun warm my skin. Today was about doing things for me, the little acts of care I had forgotten all about. I took a slow walk through the park nearby, and I could really feel the difference my Skechers made with that good arch support. For a woman of 68, those shoes are a blessing for my joints. With every step, I felt like I was shedding another layer of the burden I have been carrying around. After my walk, I stopped by the Barnes & Noble, a place where I used to spend hours when I was younger. I decided to buy myself a new Kindle Paperwhite because it has that soft light, and I can make the words as big as I need them to be. Being able to buy something for myself with the pension money I worked so hard for gave me such a strange sense of satisfaction. I did not have to look at my daughter-in-law to see if I was allowed to spend a dime. Then, I finally gathered my courage and called Helen, my best friend. Karen had cut us off months ago, telling Helen I just needed peace and quiet, which was nothing but a lie. Hearing Helen's warm voice on the other end made my eyes tear up. Helen just gasped and asked if it was really me, saying how worried she had been. We talked for a long time about old memories and everything I am going through right now. Feeling connected to the world again and being understood by an old friend gave me a surge of energy I forgot I had. For the first time in a long while, I felt true peace and a little spark of hope that my life still has so much value. I am not that invisible woman trapped by insults anymore. I am learning how to love myself again, one small joy at a time, starting with this one free day. When I got back home, the living room was quiet, but that silence did not scare me like it used to. I know my changes will not go unnoticed for long, though. I could already hear Karen whispering in the kitchen, using that fake sweet tone she gets whenever she realizes her grip on my money might be slipping. The first confrontation is coming, and this time, I am ready to set my boundaries. My friends, have you ever felt like a simple walk or a phone call to an old friend could give you so much strength? How is the weather where you are today? And have you taken a moment just for yourself? Please leave a comment and tell me about one small joy you had today. I would truly love to read them. Now, shall we continue my story? Later that afternoon, I was sitting in my reading room, my fingers tracing the smooth edges of my new Kindle. The footsteps I heard approaching were unusually light, lacking the heavy, commanding thud Karen usually used to signal her presence in my home. She walked in carrying a small tea tray with a few of those ginger cookies I used to always pick up from Target. She told me she noticed I had been looking a bit preoccupied lately and claimed she was worried about my health. Her voice was as sweet as honey, but her eyes never stopped darting over the stacks of papers I had organized on my desk. I felt a slight tightness in my chest, and my hands started to tremble just a little bit, but I forced myself to take a deep breath to stay calm. I knew exactly why she had put on this mask of kindness, because the bank had just notified us about the change in the address for my monthly statements. She sat down right next to me and reached out to place her hand on my shoulder in a way that felt far too practiced. She told me she had been looking over the household budget and claimed there was a little confusion regarding my pension check this month. She started talking about how high inflation has gotten in 2025 and how everything is becoming so expensive. She mentioned how she needed to cover the kids' tuition and how she really wanted to get them those new Skechers sneakers they had been asking for. She started playing the part of the victim, the devoted wife and mother who was just exhausted from trying to keep this family afloat. Every word she said felt like a thin silk thread trying to wrap around my heart, pulling at the guilt I had been trained to feel for so long. I did something then that I used to avoid just to keep the peace. I looked her straight in the eyes. I saw a flash of genuine surprise cross her face when I didn't immediately apologize or reach for my checkbook like I usually would. I told her very clearly and quietly that I had reorganized my affairs. I explained that I realized I needed to manage my own personal spending more closely to prepare for my future healthcare needs, especially since my arthritis was starting to flare up with the changing weather. I didn't offer any more explanations, and I didn't start an argument. A long silence stretched out between us, one so heavy that I could actually hear the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Karen's face shifted for a second, the mask slipping just enough to show the frustration underneath. She told me she was just worried that I was getting older and that sometimes my mind might not be sharp enough to handle these complicated numbers anymore. She even tried to bring up Michael, saying he was too far away to understand how hard things really were here at home. She was using her old tactics, trying to make me feel confused or like I couldn't trust my own son. But this time, those words didn't have any sting. I felt a new kind of strength growing inside me, a confidence that had been buried under years of just trying to get by. I stood up then and started gathering my papers and my Kindle. I thanked her for the tea, but told her I really needed to rest now. As for the financial matters, I mentioned that I had already been consulting with a lawyer recommended by the church to make sure everything was being handled transparently. When I said the word lawyer, I saw her pupils constrict for just a heartbeat. She never expected a quiet mother-in-law like me to take such a firm legal step in secret. I walked out of the room and left her sitting there with a tray of tea that was already growing cold. My heart was racing, but it wasn't out of fear. It was because I knew I had just won the very first round of this battle of wits. Stepping out of that room, I felt like my lungs were finally filling with clean, fresh air. But I know Karen well enough to know she won't give up that easily when her lifestyle is on the line. For the next few days, the house felt heavy, like the air right before a massive thunderstorm. I knew the sweet words were over. When someone like her feels cornered, they stop pretending. And I had to get myself ready for a direct confrontation that was going to be much more intense than anything we had faced before. It was late on Saturday night, and the house felt especially empty with Colin away, pulling an extra night shift to cover the mysterious bills Karen had been racking up. I was sitting in my bedroom when the quiet was suddenly punctured by the metallic scratching of a key in the front door lock. My heart squeezed tight in my chest as I realized it was Karen using that spare emergency key I had trusted her with so many years ago. She did not bother to knock or call out my name. Instead, she shoved my bedroom door open with a force that made the wood groan against the frame, and she stood there with her face flushed a deep angry red and her eyes showing thin veins of blood from her rage. There were no sweet words or ginger cookies tonight. She hurled a thick stack of bank documents onto my bedspread, and her voice came out as a low hiss through her teeth as she demanded to know what on earth I was doing with our bank accounts and why her secondary credit card had been declined at the mall. I felt a wave of cold fear wash over me at first, but I forced myself to stand up, and I leaned my back against my old heavy wooden dresser to keep my legs from giving out. I looked her right in the eye and told her as calmly as I could that it was not our account but my own pension and insurance money that I worked decades to earn. That initial spark of fear was quickly replaced by a hot flash of anger that had been building up inside me like steam in a pressure cooker. I looked at this woman I had once welcomed into my home as a daughter and realized she was a complete stranger driven by a hunger for things she did not earn. She started screaming then, and the insults came pouring out of her like a flood as she called me a selfish old woman who did not care about the future of her own grandchildren or the happiness of her husband. I finally reached my breaking point, and I found a voice I did not even know I still had when I shouted for her to be quiet. I asked her how she could dare to talk to me about Colin's happiness or about sacrifice when I had spent my entire life working myself to the bone. I reminded her that I had drained my own 401k savings just to pay the down payment on this very house so they would have a roof over their heads, while I endured her coldness and her attempts to hide me away in my own home. I let her know that I knew exactly what happened in Italy and that Michael had seen her in Naples spending my money on jewelry with another man while she was telling my other son I was at death's door. Each word felt like it was tearing down the elaborate stage she had built for her lies, and for a moment, she just stood there with her face turning a ghostly white as her secrets were dragged into the light. But she did not stay quiet for long, and instead of showing any remorse, she let out a chilling little laugh that made the hair on my arms stand up. Her true nature was finally out in the open, and it was uglier than I ever imagined. She asked me what an old woman like me even needed money for anyway, and she claimed that this house and every cent I had would belong to them sooner or later, because it was her husband's legal inheritance. She stepped closer to me with her hands balled into fists, and a look on her face that made me feel like she wanted to use violence to shut me up, just like she had tried before. She was not even trying to hide her greed anymore, and she spoke about my life's work as if it were already hers, and I was just a nuisance standing in the way of her lifestyle. That storm of emotion inside me finally broke through years of being told to stay quiet and keep the peace. I did not feel small anymore, and I pointed my finger toward the door and told her in a voice that was as sharp as a razor to get out of my house immediately. I reminded her that she had no rights here because this house is mine, and it is in my name alone, and from this second on, she would not be seeing another penny of my money. Karen looked at me with a hatred so deep it felt like she wanted to burn me where I stood. But I could see a flicker of real surprise and even a bit of fear in her eyes. She never expected the woman she thought was weak and broken to stand her ground with such fierce resolve. Before she walked out, she turned back one last time and whispered a threat that was so cold it made the room feel like winter. She told me I would regret this and that she would tell Colin I had finally lost my mind and attacked her. She sneered that no one would believe an old woman and that I should get used to the idea of being alone in a state nursing home. The sound of the front door slamming shut felt like a final punctuation mark on our relationship. I sank down into my old armchair, feeling like every bit of energy had been drained from my body, but underneath the exhaustion, there was a massive sense of relief. The storm had passed, and while it left a lot of wreckage behind, I could finally see the truth for what it was, and I knew I could never go back to the way things were. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, but I was not crying or wallowing in sadness. My mind was moving fast as I realized her threat about the nursing home was not just talk, and I had to move quickly to protect myself. I knew I had to secure my physical safety and my legal rights before Colin even made it back home. I made a list of everything I needed to do, starting with calling a locksmith to change every single lock on this house first thing in the morning. I realized I needed a professional defense and a solid plan because the freedom I just found was something I was going to have to fight to keep. Early the next morning, I did not allow myself to crumble under the weight of my exhaustion because I knew that being active was the only way to stay safe. My very first move was to pick up the phone and call an attorney who specializes in elder law, a professional I found through the legal aid office at my church. Sitting in that office, surrounded by the warm morning sunlight and the clean scent of fresh stationery, I laid out the whole truth about how my pension was being drained and the terrifying threats Karen had made about forcing me into a nursing home. We talked about the complicated changes to Medicare in this 2025 economy and the shifting tax burdens that are hitting middle-class seniors on a fixed income so hard right now. The lawyer was so professional, and his calm voice helped me understand that I was not losing my mind or being difficult, and that the law was actually there to protect my rights and my dignity. As he explained the steps we would take to protect my estate, I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders because I finally had a strong ally standing in my corner. When I left the attorney's office, I drove straight over to the Home Depot at the corner of the block. I was no longer the fragile woman waiting for my son to find the time to fix up the house or help me with chores. I chose the newest smart lock system and a set of high-definition security cameras that I could monitor right from my own phone or tablet. Later that afternoon, with the help of a professional locksmith, every single entrance to my home was secured with new digital codes and heavy-duty deadbolts. When I heard that first solid click of the new lock turning, a wave of peace traveled all the way down my spine. I spent the rest of the evening setting up the application on my tablet, realizing I could now see every inch of my porch and driveway without ever having to worry about Karen showing up with her old spare key. This physical safety felt like the very first solid brick I was laying down to rebuild the life she tried to steal from me. The next step was a total financial cleaning of my life because I knew Karen would not stop trying to find a way back into my pockets. I spent a good part of the afternoon at the bank, working with a consultant to open a brand new account that Karen had absolutely no access to. I transferred every cent of my remaining balance and made sure my statements were sent to a secure digital box instead of the physical mailbox at the end of the driveway. I also took the heavy but necessary step of officially revoking every power of attorney I had signed, while I was in that fog of grief right after my husband passed away. Taking those old credit cards and cutting them right down the middle felt like I was finally saying a permanent goodbye to a past where I was being used and erased. On my way home, I stopped at a shoe store to buy a pair of sturdy Clark's walking shoes because I knew I needed to keep my feet firmly on the ground for the road ahead. Taking charge of my own money again made me feel like I was finally the master of my own house. Finally, I did something I never thought I would have the heart to do, but I cut off every digital connection I had with her. I blocked her number and her social media pages where she used to post those fake family photos that never showed the reality of our lives. I was done listening to her fake apologies or her mean-spirited threats. A quiet peace returned to the house, but it was a peaceful silence, not the scary isolation I used to feel when she was ignoring me. I sat down in my favorite chair and opened up my Kindle Paperwhite to lose myself in a new story, feeling safety returning to my breathing. I had built a real defense around my life, but I realized I could not live entirely behind these walls. The sounds of that terrible argument the night before had not gone unnoticed by the neighborhood. Just as I was checking my new camera feed, I heard a gentle knock on the front door. It was not the loud pounding Karen used, but a soft, warm rhythm that sounded like someone from the outside world was finally reaching out to help me. The person standing at my door was Mrs. Thompson, the neighbor who had lived across the street for more than 20 years. She was holding a warm pie, and the scent of cinnamon and apples drifted into the hallway as she spoke. She told me she had heard the noise the night before and just wanted to see if I was okay. Her eyes filled with a deep sense of worry and compassion. I had almost reached for my usual habit of smiling and saying everything was fine, but something about her warmth made that old shield of mine just melt away. I invited her in, and for the very first time, I shared the truth about what Karen had been doing to me. Mrs. Thompson squeezed my hand and told me she had suspected something was wrong for a long time since I was rarely outside, and my garden had been left to go wild. That simple moment of being seen and understood felt like a healing balm for my heart. The next day, I met Helen at a quiet little cafe we used to visit all the time before Karen started isolating me from everyone. Helen listened to me talk about changing the locks and hiring a lawyer with a look that was part shock and part pure pride. She told me I was doing exactly the right thing and that I should never let anyone take my voice away ever again. She even offered to come with me to my next legal appointment and said she was more than ready to testify about how I had been kept away from my friends for so long. Looking at Helen, I realized that the community and the network of friends I thought I had lost were actually still right there, just waiting for me to open up and let them back in. Her support gave me a surge of strength that felt like it could last forever. That evening, I sat alone in my house, but for the first time in years, I did not actually feel lonely. The warmth from those conversations throughout the day stayed with me, making me realize I did not have to face this storm by myself anymore. Having Mrs. Thompson and Helen by my side felt like light finally breaking through a long, dark fog. My faith in the goodness of people, something I thought Karen had broken for good, was starting to come back. I looked at an old family photo and felt stronger than I have ever been because I finally have allies and a real plan. I know the fight for my dignity is still ahead of me, but I also know I am going to win because I am no longer standing in this fight alone. The support from my friends gave me the energy to start clearing the traces of that old, oppressive atmosphere out of my home. While I was cleaning out an old desk drawer where Karen used to help me organize things, I felt my hand brush against a stack of papers hidden deep in the back. It was an envelope with no return address. But once I opened it, I found a secret that was even more terrifying than the betrayal Michael had told me about. I realized I was now holding a weapon I never expected to find. My friends, has a small act of kindness from a neighbor or a strong word from an old friend ever helped you through your darkest hour? What kind of gifts do people in your neighborhood bring when they come to visit? Please leave a comment and share your stories about those good neighbors with me. I would love to hear them. Now, let us get back to what happened next. I was tidying up the drawers in our small home library where my husband used to keep all our house records and memories of our life together. In a dark corner of one drawer, my hand brushed against a light blue plastic envelope that had been shoved way in the back behind some old bills and property tax records. My heart started to hammer against my ribs when I recognized Karen's sharp handwriting on the cover where she had written the words, "Mother's Retirement Plan." A cold feeling of dread started to crawl over my skin because I knew her heart was never in the right place when it came to my future. I opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, desperately hoping I was just being paranoid or overly sensitive. But the color drained from my face the moment I saw the first page. It was not a list of medical instructions or savings accounts for the grandkids as I had hoped. Instead, it was a thick stack of printed emails and rough drafts of legal agreements. The air in that quiet room suddenly felt thin and strange, like a winter chill had moved in right in the middle of a hot American summer. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I read the bold text in an email she had sent to a man I didn't even recognize. She wrote that I would soon no longer be autonomous and that she had already started creating a paper trail to show I was becoming forgetful and mentally unstable. She claimed that once there were enough medical records, the house could be sold easily to pay off their mounting debts. It made my skin crawl to realize she had been planning this for a long time, taking advantage of the weeks when I was weak from that long respiratory virus that went around earlier in 2025 to build a fake medical history for me. She wasn't just interested in my monthly checks anymore. She wanted to steal my entire legacy and my dignity using the dirtiest methods imaginable. A deep sense of disgust rose up in my throat as I looked at the person she really was behind that fake smile she wore at the dinner table. The papers in my hands started to feel as heavy as lead as everything finally started to make sense in a way that hurt more than I can describe. I realized then why my wooden walking stick was always going missing, and why my friends' calls never seemed to get through to me anymore. It wasn't just her being careless or me being forgetful. It was a systematic plan to isolate me and make everyone, even my own son Colin, believe I was losing my mind. I saw a draft of a letter she was planning to send to a private nursing home with costs that were absolutely staggering. Money she planned to take directly from my pension while telling the world she was just being a devoted daughter-in-law. Every single illusion I had left about her having a shred of a conscience just vanished, leaving me with a bitter clarity that was as sharp as a knife. I took that stack of papers straight to the scanner and started copying every single page as fast as my hands could move. The rhythmic humming sound of the machine in that quiet room felt like a final bell tolling for Karen's control over my life. I emailed every single page to my lawyer, and then I called Michael on a secure line, needing to hear a voice I could actually trust. Hearing my youngest son's voice from across the ocean gave me a fresh burst of strength, right when I felt like I was going to collapse under the weight of it all. He told me that this was our secret weapon, and that we had everything we needed to protect my home and my life. A strange kind of relief washed over me because even though the truth was ugly, it was finally in my hands, and there was no more room for doubt or second-guessing. I walked out onto the porch and watched the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. Finding out the cold, hard truth had left me feeling completely drained, both in my body and my spirit. I realized I needed a place to rest my heart and find some balance before I had to face the final battle that was surely coming. Without even thinking about it, my feet started carrying me toward the old bedroom where I could still feel the warmth and the memory of the man who had been my rock for so many years. I sat down in that old leather armchair, the one with the worn corners where my husband used to spend every single morning reading the newspaper. The room still holds onto that faint scent of pine and a lingering hint of the tobacco he favored for so many years. I reached out and touched our wedding photo on the side table, looking into his steady eyes as he stood tall in that military uniform from his days in the service. A wave of deep, heavy sadness just washed over me, and for a moment, I wished more than anything that he was still here to shield me from the cold cruelty I am facing right now. This house we built together through so many economic storms, from the struggles of the past decades to the more recent crashes, is more than just property. To me, it is the living symbol of our persistence and our refusal to ever give up on one another. In the absolute quiet of that room, I found myself starting a silent conversation with him, the kind we used to have late at night. I whispered into the air, asking him what on earth I should do now that I felt so cornered. I started remembering all the things he taught our boys about honor and honesty, and about how you have to stand up for what is right, no matter how much it might cost you in the end. I could almost feel his rough, warm hand holding mine, just like he did when we were struggling through those terrible inflation years and the oil crisis back in the 70s. It felt like he was right there in the shadows, whispering to me that I am not weak at all, and that I am the one who has always been the spiritual pillar and the one who kept the fire burning for this family. Slowly, that aching pain in my chest started to make room for a strange, solid kind of peace. I stood up and took a long, deep breath, feeling a surge of resilience moving through my veins like a physical thing. The legacy we built together is not just the bricks of this house or the numbers in a retirement account. It is the dignity of a woman who has given her entire life and her hard work to her family. The memory of his love has become a shield for me now, helping me find the iron will I need to protect myself and my home from these ugly, greedy schemes. I am not just some poor woman hiding away anymore. I am a person ready to reclaim the fairness and justice I deserve for my own life. The stillness of those memories gave me the courage I needed, but the world outside was not going to let me stay in peace for long. Karen realized that her grip on my life was finally slipping and that I was taking real legal steps to protect myself, and she decided to throw away the last bit of decency she had left. She decided to escalate things by attacking my very freedom and my mental health by calling in the local authorities. A strange, sharp ring of the doorbell echoed through the house, bringing with it a kind of pressure and a challenge I never could have imagined I would have to face in my own home. I was sitting in my kitchen, taking my time with a bowl of cereal and some fruit, feeling the familiar comfort of my Skechers on my feet. Suddenly, a sharp and authoritative knock came at the door. It was not the sound of Karen's key or Mrs. Thompson's soft tap. When I opened the door, I was met by a middle-aged woman in a gray vest with an Adult Protective Services badge and two medical professionals standing right behind her. They told me they had received an emergency report that I was showing signs of severe cognitive decline and that I was engaging in self-harming behavior. That feeling of having my private life invaded so suddenly made me feel a deep shake in my bones, and my chest felt like it was being squeezed by a heavy hand. I caught a glimpse of Karen lurking behind the glass of her car parked down the street, and for a split second, I saw a triumphant smile on her face. The social worker stepped into my home and her eyes immediately started scanning every corner, from the medicine bottles on my table to the way my hand held my teacup. They began asking me basic cognitive assessment questions, the kind of things I knew Karen had prepared to make me feel confused and small. She had reported that I was frequently forgetting to turn off the stove, getting lost in the neighborhood, and that I was no longer capable of managing my own money. Karen walked into the house then, playing the part of the heartbroken daughter-in-law with a trembling voice, claiming they were just so worried because I was supposedly talking to my late husband and hiding things around the house. Hearing those bold lies made a fire of outrage burn in my throat, but I knew I had to stay calm because this was an attack on my very dignity. Instead of starting a loud argument, I gestured for the social worker to sit down and I asked for permission to call my attorney. With my lawyer on the speaker and the copies of the evidence I had already prepared, I began to lay out the real situation with complete composure. I presented my detailed expense logs, my utility bills that I had paid on time myself, and my most recent medical records from my primary care physician within my Medicare network. I even showed them the video footage from my new security system that clearly captured Karen taking away my walking stick and intentionally moving my things around to create a scene that looked like I was confused. I watched the social worker's face change from suspicion to pure shock as she saw how prepared and sharp I really was. At that point, Karen started to lose her cool and she tried to interrupt by suggesting a mental health evaluation with a doctor she had already arranged. But following my lawyer's advice, I firmly refused her doctor and demanded an independent evaluation at a highly respected hospital in our area. I looked Karen right in the eyes, and I could see the fear finally starting to crawl into her gaze. She never expected the woman she viewed as her prey to fight back with such a methodical and courageous spirit. The interview ended with the social worker taking detailed notes about the clear signs of emotional abuse and psychological manipulation coming from my caregiver. They gave Karen a serious warning about the legal consequences of making false reports and continuing her harassment. Once they left, the air in the house was still heavy with tension, but I felt an unshakable strength rising up inside me. I was no longer the one being pushed into a corner because I had successfully defended my own autonomy against her dirtiest tactics. This resilience was not just for me. It was for the honor of the family I had spent my whole life protecting. After everyone had gone, I sat in my living room feeling exhausted but deeply proud of myself. Colin came home and saw the mess and started asking what on earth was going on. For the very first time, I did not stay quiet to protect his wife. I handed him the preliminary report from the social worker and let him read it for himself. I watched the cold truth finally start to sink into my eldest son's mind, the man who had been avoiding reality for far too long. This confrontation drew a clear line in the sand, showing him that I would never let anyone take my freedom under the name of caring for me. This legal battle was likely going to be long, but after today, I knew I was strong enough to see it through to the end. Karen being defeated in her attempt to attack my mental health has left her with nowhere else to hide. She knows she cannot use her secret games anymore. Only a few days later, I received a large envelope in the mail. It was a formal court summons. The final battle was no longer going to happen inside the four walls of this house, but in a courtroom where every single lie would have to face the coldest truth. My friends, have you ever felt like you were being misunderstood or even falsely accused without knowing how to explain yourself? In those moments, what was it that helped you keep your head clear so you could protect yourself? Please leave a comment and tell me how you dealt with people telling lies about you. I am always here to listen. Now, let us get back to my story. I held the court summons in my hand, the thick paper and the bold black ink feeling like cold judgments on a family bond that had already shattered into 1,000 pieces. Karen, acting through her lawyer, had filed a formal lawsuit against me to demand full guardianship of all my assets and was even asking the court to force me out of my own home under the guise of ensuring my medical safety. That initial wave of tension made my head spin for a moment, making the air in the room feel thin and heavy at the same time. But I quickly found my center by thinking of Michael far away and the unwavering support I had received from my church family. I realized I was no longer afraid of these legal documents or the weight they carried because the truth and the physical evidence were finally on my side. This was the final step in reclaiming the freedom and the life I knew I deserved to live, and I was determined to face it with my head held high. Karen's attorney had sent over a mediation proposal through my own lawyer, but it was nothing more than an insult to my dignity and a clever trap designed to take the last of what I had left. They suggested that I should move into a high-end nursing home they had already picked out for me and sign over the deed of my house to Colin and Karen, promising they would take care of all my future expenses in return. Sitting there in the quiet of my lawyer's office, I took a long, deep breath and looked at the list of everything my husband and I had built together over 40 long years of hard work. saving every penny through economic shifts and uncertain times. I looked my attorney in the eye and told him very clearly that there would be no mediation or compromise because I was not about to trade the house that held all my precious memories for a fake peace under the control of the person who betrayed me. I was finished with letting other people make decisions for me, and I was not going to let them strip away the legacy I had intended for my children and grandchildren. Michael had managed to take some time off, and he called me on a secure video line every single night so we could go over every detail of our legal strategy with my lawyer. We carefully reviewed the bank statements showing Karen's unusual and unauthorized withdrawals, the emails where she discussed her plans to take my property, and the written testimony from Mrs. Thompson about how I had been intentionally isolated from my neighbors. This preparation did not feel like it was born out of a desire for hatred, but rather a very serious and quiet commitment to seeing justice done after so much time spent in the dark. I felt a heavy kind of stillness in my spirit as we walked through the evidence, much like the quiet, weighted air right before a massive storm reaches the shore. I was finally ready to stand up and tell my own story in front of a judge, not as a victim who was easily manipulated, but as a woman who was the true and rightful master of her own life. On the night before we were set to go to court, I cleaned my room one more time, carefully tucking my most important papers into my secure lockbox and making sure everything was in its proper place. I picked out my most formal and professional outfit, a navy blue suit that I usually only wore for the most important holidays and celebrations at church. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a 68-year-old woman with the lines of time and experience on her face, but my eyes were shining with a steady resolve I had never felt before in all my years. I reminded myself that I was not alone in this fight because I had Michael, my lawyer, my good friends, and the spirit of my late husband watching over every step I took. All the lingering anxiety I had been carrying finally moved aside to make room for a quiet, focused readiness to receive the final judgment of the law. When my alarm went off early the next morning, it marked the beginning of the day I had been waiting for with both dread and hope. I stepped into the car with my lawyer, and we headed toward the county courthouse with a strange sense of calm settled over me, even as the world moved quickly outside the window. As the trees along the road blurred past and the city sounds grew louder, I knew that once I walked back through my front door, my life would never be the same again. All of Karen's lies and schemes were about to face the cold, unforgiving light of justice in that courtroom, and I was finally ready to face whatever the truth brought next. I walked into that courtroom with Michael right by my side, feeling the steady strength from my youngest son's hand on my arm. The air inside that room felt incredibly solemn and cold, with the scent of polished wood and the quiet sound of footsteps on the floor creating a tension that I could feel in the very marrow of my bones. I took my seat behind my lawyer and looked across the room to see Karen trying her best to put on a worried, pitiful face for the judge. Colin was sitting right next to her, looking like he had aged 10 years in just a few weeks with a hollow, shell-shocked look in his eyes, as if he still could not believe his family was falling apart in such a public way. I took a deep, grounding breath and felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I was no longer that frightened mother-in-law, trapped in the dark shadows of her own home. I was an American citizen, standing there to protect my right to live in freedom and dignity under the clear light of justice. Karen's side started the proceedings with a string of bold, calculated lies. Her lawyer tried to paint a picture of a devoted, exhausted daughter-in-law who had been forced to carry the heavy burden of caring for an elderly woman who was no longer in her right mind. Karen actually started sobbing as she told the judge stories about how I had supposedly been hurting myself and how she had no choice but to lock the doors and restrict my movement just to keep me safe. Every single one of those lies felt like a jagged blade trying to tear away my dignity right there in front of the court. I saw Colin bow his head, looking like he was shivering at the sheer coldness of the performance his wife was putting on. But instead of feeling the hot anger I expected, I felt a deep, heavy sense of pity for someone who would cling to such ugly lies just to feed her own bottomless greed. When it was finally our turn, my lawyer stood up with a thick, heavy file of evidence that felt like it held the weight of my entire life. He began to lay out the bank statements that showed more than $50,000 of my pension and retirement money had been drained in a series of highly unusual withdrawals. He pointed out that this money was not spent on my medical care or household needs, but was used for luxury shopping trips and expensive jewelry transactions in Italy. Every single number he called out rang through that quiet courtroom with a sharp, undeniable clarity. My lawyer then presented the official records from Adult Protective Services that completely dismantled the false reports Karen had made about my mental health. I could see the sweat starting to break out on Karen's forehead, and she began to wring her hands together as the mask of the devoted daughter was slowly stripped away by the cold facts of the financial and legal systems. The turning point of the entire trial came when our secret evidence was finally brought into the light. My lawyer read the exact words from the emails Karen had sent to her associates, discussing her long-term plan to have me declared incompetent so she could seize total control of the house. She had written that I would soon be unable to manage myself, and she was creating a path to make sure I was neutralized. Hearing those words read aloud in that quiet room felt like a winter wind, exposing the absolute cruelty and the cold calculations she had been making for years, going all the way back to the times I was struggling to keep our heads above water after the 2008 recession. The entire courtroom seemed to let out a collective gasp of shock. The judge called for silence, and the look she gave Karen was filled with a sharp, unrelenting sternness. The most disgusting secrets were finally out in the open, and there was nowhere left for the traitor to hide. When I was finally asked to stand and speak for myself, I did not use any harsh words or let my voice shake with bitterness. I stood up straight and spoke in a voice that was calm but carried the weight of all my years. I talked about what this home really meant to me, about the love I had always tried to give Colin and the trust I had once placed in Karen. I spoke about the right every person has to grow old with dignity, not to be treated like a burden or a bank account to be emptied. I told the judge that I only wanted to be the person I was meant to be in the house that I had built with my own two hands. As I looked into the judge's eyes, I felt a genuine sense of empathy coming back toward me. I felt the strength of my ancestors and the memory of my late husband's voice reminding me that justice always has a place for those who are brave enough to fight for the truth. The judge finally brought down her gavel with a sound that felt like it echoed through my entire soul as she delivered her final ruling. She completely rejected every single request Karen had made for guardianship and declared that I was in full control of my own life, my assets, and my home. She issued a blistering reprimand against Karen for her emotional and financial abuse and ordered that the local authorities continue their investigation into the clear signs of fraud and theft. A permanent restraining order was put into place to make sure Karen was never allowed to come near me or step foot on my property ever again. When that final sound of the gavel hit the wood, I felt a massive, crushing weight lift off my chest. The truth had finally won, and I was truly free. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright, golden sunlight, and it felt like the world was welcoming me back. Michael wrapped his arms around me in a tight hug, and that was when the tears finally started to fall. Not because of the pain, but because of the overwhelming relief of being safe again. I saw Colin standing a little ways off, looking lonely and completely broken by the reality of what he had allowed to happen. I know that the road to healing things with my oldest son is going to be very long and very difficult, but at least I know that I am finally secure in my own life. I took a long, deep breath of the free air, feeling the tension finally leave my body. The storm had truly passed, leaving behind a sky that was clear and bright. I had managed to take my life back from the people who wanted to bury it in silence. A little while after the trial ended, I found myself standing out on my porch, looking at my old house that suddenly seemed to have a whole new spirit. My life was no longer filled with days of fear and forced silence. I realized that I needed to make one final choice to truly close the door on the past and start a brand new chapter, one filled with the peace and the passions I had put aside for far too long. A few months after that final day in court, I made the difficult but necessary choice to sell the old house. It was a place filled with so many beautiful memories of the man I loved, but it had also become a place of heavy shadows and a pain that I simply did not want to carry into my future. I moved down to a bright and cozy condo right near the water in Florida, where the air always smells like salt and the morning sun feels like a warm blessing. Now my days start on a yoga mat, and my afternoons are spent with a paintbrush in my hand as I rediscover a passion I set aside 40 years ago just to take care of everyone else's needs. I spend my time traveling on those wonderful Viking cruises, meeting people who truly understand this stage of life, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I am finally living for myself. Colin calls me every now and then, and we are slowly learning how to be mother and son again, in a healthy way without all the manipulation and the weight of the past. Life feels so full and quiet now, and every single breath I take tastes like the pure sweetness of my own freedom. When I look back on this journey, I realize there is a precious lesson I really want to share with all of you, my dear sisters and friends. Please never let your deep love for your family turn into a chain that takes away your dignity or your self-respect. We spend so much of our lives building nests and safe places for everyone else. But you must always remember that you deserve a sanctuary of your own where you are truly honored and respected. You have to find the courage to stand up for yourself and trust that little voice inside your heart, and never be afraid to reach out for professional help when things don't feel right. You are a treasure and a living legacy for your family, and you deserve to be loved and cherished for the woman you are, and not just for what you can provide or give away. I wish you all peace and a steady heart on your own path. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me to hear my story.
Thank you for sharing this time with me. It means so much to have you here. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with a sister who needs to hear it. We are never alone when we stand together. Stay strong, keep your light shining, and stay blessed until next time.